It might be the most sought-after cult object in history, the Holy Grail. Christians, Crusaders, and Nazis have all tried to find it. The Grail promises power, influence, and eternal life.
I certainly believe that the Holy Grail could exist.
Which cup is the real Grail? Will the lead take us to King Arthur? Or is the crucial clue hidden in Da Vinci's masterpiece? Researchers are trying to solve this millennia-old myth. The great myths of mankind, mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend, and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. To Spaniards, this is the Santo Cáliz, the Holy Grail. Valencia Cathedral has been its home for centuries. Believers think this sparkling vessel is the cup Jesus Christ handed his disciples at the Last Supper. But is this truly the real Holy Grail? Art historian Ana Marfa Garcia is trying to get to the bottom of this.
I am convinced this is the chalice of Jesus. It is the Holy Grail.
She's a newcomer in the quest for the real Grail, adopting new approaches, like using images of the Grail.
They inspired me to look for the Holy Grail in art history.
In her search, she pores over all paintings featuring the Grail. Paintings of the Last Supper, the origin of all stories linked to the Holy Grail. The Bible describes the eve of the crucifixion, when Jesus asked his disciples to drink from a cup of wine, saying this was his blood that will be shed for everyone. A key moment for Christianity. Jesus promises to remain present in bread and wine. The supper stands for community. Those who drink from the cup are part of this community and can hope for life after death.
The Holy Grail is like a condensed conduit for the power of creation, which can be used to heal, to restore sanity. It comes in the form of a cornucopia, which delivers the sustenance of life and the womb from which life comes. You name it. The Grail, in its essence, represents the source of creation itself.
The chalice disappeared over the centuries. In medieval times, the Crusaders revived the legend. They want to conquer the Holy Land and bring relics to Europe. The myth of the Holy Grail is born in this era. Christian orders of knights traveled to Constantinople and Jerusalem to free the holy city from Islamic rule. On their way, they pillaged cities and temples. At the time, relics, purportedly sacred objects, were highly sought-after items, like wood splinters or nails said to come from Jesus' cross, bones of saints. One object is particularly coveted, the Grail, the Lord's chalice.
I certainly believe that the Holy Grail could exist. So much associated with Christ was preserved and carefully looked after at the time, and the idea that the cup from the Last Supper is still there is, to my mind, perfectly believable. But the real question is whether it still actually exists in a private collection, perhaps even in a museum, and no one knows what it is.
Vessels that prompt speculation surface time and time again. Which goblet is the real Grail? Bowls made of wood or of precious stone? Celtic cups which allegedly can feed thousands of men or raise the dead. Elaborately decorated vessels laden with ritual significance.
What's fascinating about all of the different cups that survive, that claim to be the Holy Grail, is that they're all completely different. They look different, they're made out of different materials. And it makes you wonder what actually you need to have, what properties you need to have to be the Holy Grail.
Today we know that the object known as Nantia's cup from England is actually a fruit bowl which dates back no more than 600 years. The Sacro Catino, made from emerald, is a medieval Islamic bowl. Valencia. Perhaps this is where the real Grail can be found. This Spanish seaport was an important trading hub in the Middle Ages. Could the Holy Grail have ended up here? July 2006, Pope Benedict XVI presents the mysterious cup to more than 1 million worshippers in Valencia. It is a special moment for Christians from all four corners of the world. But to this very day, there is no scientific evidence that the Valencian chalice is the real Holy Grail. This is where the Santo Chalice has been preserved for the past 600 years, the Valencia Cathedral. Closely guarded in a side chapel, behind glass and secured with alarms. Anna Marfa Garcia and German historian Michael Hesemann have the chance to look at the cup up close. Up until now, both have only studied the Grail in theory. They know how charged the debate is regarding the authenticity of the vessel.
Finding and in fact proving that the Holy Grail is real is important because it's evidence. If we find the Holy Grail, then it tells us definitely that Jesus was real, that the stories about him are real, and that the religions that rely on these stories are not just symbolic, but can be taken literally.
The Valencian cup can only be observed under strict security measures. Garcia and Hesemann are looking for clues that previously have been overlooked. The cup is definitely old enough. It was probably made about 2,000 years ago by Middle Eastern craftspeople. The researchers gather insights and facts to solve the mystery of the Holy Grail. The Santo Chalice from Valencia. Could it really be the cup from the Last Supper? Ana Marfa Garcia needs more evidence. She meets Daniel Benito, an art historian. He takes her to the Colegio del Patriarca, a seminary founded hundreds of years ago. Garcia is looking for representations of the Holy Grail in art. She wants to trace it back to the artists who saw it. What did they know about it? The refectory is decorated with a 1599 depiction of the Last Supper. It shows a chalice bearing a striking resemblance to the Santo Chalice.
What we see here is a conventional or even ordinary depiction of the refectory. It's the Last Supper of Jesus and his disciples before the Passion. It is usually portrayed from a theological perspective, focusing on the Eucharist. This is an archaeological and not theological reconstruction of how this supper might really have happened.
The most interesting part to me is that the Valencian chalice has a central position in this image.
No matter which painting Garcia examines, if there is a cup on the table, artists seem to agree as to what the real cup looked like. 500 years ago, there was broad consensus in Christianity regarding the appearance of the Grail.
From the 16th century onwards, in the world of art history, just one single relic is depicted in the paintings. It is the Holy Chalice of Valencia Cathedral.
But how did the Grail travel from Jerusalem to Spain, across the entire Roman Empire? Garcia's hypothesis is that the cup came to Rome at some point during the 1st century. There, an early and persecuted Christian community hides it, maybe in the catacombs beneath the metropolis. We can still see images of Christian ceremonies on the walls to this day. And indeed, the catacombs of Rome show a cup that at least bears some resemblance to the Valencian chalice.
When research into the Holy Grail began, it was fascinating to learn that there really was a primitive representation of the upper part of the Holy Chalice in the catacombs of Rome.
Garcia corroborates her theory that the Grail must have been in Rome with yet another piece of evidence. The first popes used this cup to celebrate Holy Mass in the underground. It's the era of the persecution of Christians. An old Latin text bears witness to how Christians used the cup for Holy Communion. In this text, the early Christians refer to the cup literally. During the ceremony, they say that Jesus used hunc preclarum calicem, this precious chalice. They mean the Santo Calice. Could the upper part of the Valencian chalice be the original, with the lower part being added at a later date? And if this is true, how did the cup travel from Rome to Spain? For 20 years, Michael Hesseman has been looking for evidence. He believes he is close to a breakthrough. His key to the Grail, a medieval verse romance, Percival. Written in the 12th and 13th century by Chrétien de Troyes in France and Wolfram von Eschenbach in Germany. Hesseman is certain that these ancient texts will provide crucial clues in the search of the real Grail.
Percival is a real treasure map. You just have to follow it and you will find the Grail.
Percival's story is unique in Europe. To fulfill his dream of becoming a knight, the young hero has to pass countless tests. One of them is to find the Grail. Percival arrives at the Castle of the Grail, a mysterious place inhabited by the terminally ill Fisher King, who can only be kept alive by the Grail. The king invites Percival to his castle. The young hero witnesses miraculous events. Food and drinks galore said to be provided by the Grail. Eventually, he sees the chalice being carried through the room. The text describes it as a shining star from the heavens. Is this merely medieval fiction? Hesseman is convinced there's more to this story.
Reading Percival, you will find the place where the Grail was hidden in the 11th or 12th century.
Hesseman has found a suspicious location in the text. Young Percival receives a description of the castle where he will meet both the king and the Grail. It's called Montsalvatge. Michael Hesemann seeks to find this legendary castle in Spain. His quest for the Grail takes him to the Spanish Pyrenees, where the castle Montsalvage could be located. Hesemann wants to retrace the path the Grail has taken. He thinks that after Jesus died, the Grail was taken from Jerusalem to Rome, and later St. Lawrence, a 3rd century deacon, brought it to Spain. Hesemann drives to an old country house where the family of St. Lawrence lived. St. Lawrence tried to save the church possessions from Rome during the persecution of the Christians.
When the Roman emperor persecuted the Christians and seized all treasures of the church, Lawrence managed to entrust the Grail to a Spanish legionnaire, who brought it safely to this place, Lawrence's parents' manor.
The Grail remains hidden in the Pyrenees for centuries. Nobody knows its exact location, but Hesemann believes the guardians of the Grail used landmarks for guidance.
Behind those clouds lies the Pico di Gratal, the mountain of the Grail, 1,563 meters high. This was their marker. Behind it, the land of the Grail began. This is where we begin our search.
Hesemann believes the Montsalvage castle from the Percival poem lies behind those mountains. The narrow serpentines take him deep into the Pyrenees. Hesemann thinks the Percival epos is like a treasure map that just needs to be interpreted properly. Percival's first stop in the romance, a river where he meets the Fisher King. Hesemann thinks he has located the exact place of the encounter.
We can see the Rio Aragon here. Percival rode along its shores. And in the background, there is the Mont Salvatoris, the Pico de San Salvador. In the local Occitan language spoken in Aragon at the time, it was called Mont Salvage, and later, this became the name of the Castle of the Grail in Percival.
The Castle of the Grail. Does it really exist outside the realm of imagination?
This is the historical path Percival took on his horse. Of course, you can't use today's roads, but have to investigate historical roads and trails.
Percival and the Castle of the Grail in northeastern Spain? The text comes with directions. At the foot of that mountain, turn right. At the end of the path lies an ancient building hidden below a ledge. The monastery of San Juan de la Peña. It was built in the 10th century, long before Percival was written. Today, the monastery is a Spanish national monument. Michael Hesemann finds depictions of the Last Supper everywhere, which isn't necessarily unusual for a monastery. But is this really the place the Grail was hidden? Hesemann is not the first to follow the clues in Percival and to end up in the Pyrenees. Around the year 1930, German author Otto Rahn takes the ancient text literally. His search takes him to the other side of the mountain range, to France. Rahn believes the Château de Montségur is the castle of the Grail. Later, he looks for the Grail on behalf of the Nazis.
All sorts of people throughout history have been hunting for the Grail because it's such a mysterious object. If you were the people who could actually find it after centuries of being lost, then you prove that you've got the power, you've got the legitimacy, that you were destined to own it. And that's exactly why Hitler and why Himmler searched for the Grail during the Second World War. It would prove that they had a right to be doing what they were doing.
Hitler remains skeptical, But Himmler, head of the SS, is obsessed with occult Germanic rites. The mass murderer firmly believes that he who has the Grail will be invincible.
Heinrich Himmler sincerely believed in the occult, which didn't just mean that he wanted to find occult objects. He wanted to make a mythic reality. He wanted there to be Nazi knights of a kind of new Arthurian order.
Himmler wants the Grail to be at the center of a new Germanic cult. He invests means and men in the search for the Grail, but to no avail. Otto Rahn commits suicide. The SS largely disregards the monastery San Juan de la Peña. The Nazis don't want to share the Grail with the church. Are they missing out on the most promising lead? If the Grail used to be here, there could still be traces of it today. Michael Hesemann wants to take a closer look at the basement. A local guide takes him through the monastic maze. The heroic epic provides an exact account of the rooms where Percival sees the Grail.
In the middle, he saw 4 pillars, and in between, a giant fire was ablaze. And here, he met the king of the Grail and spoke with him. And then he saw how a procession entered through the door on the other side of the hall, carried the Grail, carried it through the hall, and disappeared through another door on the other side of the room.
Percival witnesses an Easter procession, a mysterious ritual to him. Hesemann is certain this is the right place.
We can see 1, 2, 3, 4 large pillars here, and 1, 2, 3 spaces in between where the braziers were placed, because it was cold down here in April.
The Percival text also describes how the Grail is retrieved from a chamber. Hesemann believes he sees evidence pointing to this Romance verse too. He finds a small side room.
This niche, this chapel, is where the Grail was stored for more than 300 years.
The text contains another important detail. It references a baptism. What looks like water turned into stone today are actually calcium deposits of an old spring. This place was really used for baptisms. In the epic, the Grail is carried up a flight of stairs.
From there, the stairs led up to the church of San Juan de la Peña.
Hesemann climbs to the church of the monastery. If there is truth to the Percival story, this is where the monks must have worshipped the Holy Grail.
Looks like the entire description of the Castle of the Grail in the poem matches San Juan de la Peña. All the places, all the rooms are here, exactly as the text says.
There is some evidence that Michael Hesemann is right, and that there was a cup that was worshipped here in the Middle Ages. Is it the one that's in Valencia today? Could it be the real Grail? It will probably be impossible to prove once and for all that Jesus used this exact chalice. Truth is, the Valencian chalice doesn't look anything like the Grail described in Percival. It is described as a shining stone from the heavens. How does this relate to the Santo Cáliz? At the Department of Art History of the University of Valencia, Maria Gomez, expert for ancient artwork, is preparing an experiment. Ana Marfa Garcia wants to know if anything about the Santo Chalice could in fact point to a shining star from the heavens.
All literary descriptions of the Holy Chalice, or Holy Grail, agree on the upper bowl, the chalice, which is in Valencia.
De la copa que tenemos en Valencia. Espero que cuando pongamos el ágata,
I hope exposing the agate to light will show us whether it really shines the way it's been described in the medieval texts.
como decían los textos de la época medieval.
At certain light temperatures, gemstones begin to glow in different colors.
El color puede cambiar.
The colors can vary greatly depending on the light.
La luz
Light has a color.
tiene un color que
Kelvin,
los grados
degrees Kelvin.
Lo voy a
Let me
poner
give you an example.
con un ejemplo.
A painting made outside, like the picture Sorolla painted on the beach, was painted in daylight.
Esa pintura está pintada con luz.
If we expose this painting to warm light, that is 3,200 degrees Kelvin, it loses its blue color.
Luz cálida.
The color spectrum of the color blue
La
varies
cromática,
and
la
changes.
cromática de colores azules varían y cambian.
Fíjate que cuando estás
Look here. The stone has a red
de
shade.
un color rojizo, ¿vale?
We'll increase the temperature. We're increasing,
Temperatura
and it seems like it's losing its color,
que pierde,
like it's getting more yellow,
queda como más
opaque,
amarillo,
Más opaco,
Browner, even browner.
más amarronado.
even browner.
Is there a stone that shines like the gem mentioned in the medieval texts? The stone on the light table is an agate. It glows red like fire. The women are certain.
María. Hemos en-
Maria, yes, we've discovered the holy chalice in the stone. Look,
That's it, look. I can see it.
Qué curioso.
that's incredible.
Totalmente.
Eureka.
Eureka!
Yes.
Sí. Qué curioso, ¿eh?
The Santo Chalice, a chalice made of agate.
In Parzival, the Grail is actually a stone brought down from the heavens by neutral angels. And the only stone I know of that comes from the heavens is a meteorite. So if it is a meteorite, then it would be the common denominator between Excalibur and the Grail, the two most important objects in the Arthurian tradition. And both are divine right to rule, and that relates to the meteor, which of course comes as a light from the heavens, anointing the finder.
Spain isn't the only place where legends about the Grail flourish. Glastonbury, in the southwest of England. With numerous myths attached to this region, many believe the Grail was hidden here in the 1st century. After Jesus died at the cross, the other legend of the Grail suggests Joseph of Arimathea collected his blood in a cup and brought it to England. He's said to have eventually hidden this Grail in Glastonbury. It is the exact same place where one of the most influential monasteries of the Middle Ages emerges, Glastonbury Abbey. The magical ruins still attract tourists and esoterics alike, a magnet for myths. Legendary King Arthur is said to be buried here. Archaeologist Roberta Gilchrist tries to find out how much truth there is to the myths linked to Glastonbury.
Glastonbury Abbey is a famous medieval monastery, and one of the reasons is that it's associated with two key legends. One of them is King Arthur, and the other one is Joseph of Arimathea. And both of them provide a kind of origin story for the Abbey. And this isn't a new story. These things have been connected with Glastonbury for about 800 years, so it's a huge part of the Abbey's heritage.
A painting in the chapel of the Abbey commemorates Joseph of Arimathea. It shows how he traveled to England with the Grail. After arriving in Glastonbury, he sticks his walking staff into the ground and it turns into a magnificent hawthorn. To this day, it is a landmark of Glastonbury and blooms twice a year, once at Christmas, a divine symbol of the birth of Christ. There are several of these trees around Glastonbury. Joseph is said to have buried the Grail somewhere here, but it has never been found. The second big story of Glastonbury Abbey revolves around legendary King Arthur. The myth says he's buried on an island named Avalon. Some believe Avalon and Glastonbury are the same place. The legends of King Arthur and his Round Table are inextricably linked to the Holy Grail. Finding it is the primary duty of the noble order of knights.
The myth of Arthur being linked with the Holy Grail is a very important part of the Arthur story because it makes him more powerful. It gives him the divine anointment he needs to make him into a true legend which can withstand the years.
In Glastonbury, ancient legends take shape.
In the 12th century, there were a lot of stories circulating about King Arthur, and the monks of Glastonbury connected the Arthur story with Avalon.
In their chronicles, the monks documented how they come across a tomb during renovation works. Inside, they find two skeletons, a very tall man with strong bones, and a woman, King Arthur and his wife, Guinevere. With this, they find a small cross with the name Arthur and make their abbey a place of pilgrimage.
We suspect that that was a forgery, something that they copied from material culture of about a century earlier, but that gave them a kind of relic, if you like, of Arthur that people could come and look at on the site.
Roberta Gilchrist knows that after a fire in the abbey, the monks were in desperate need for money. Since then, the story of Arthur's grave has turned Glastonbury into a tourist magnet, which it remains to this very day.
It would appear that once one myth has become attached to an area, then other myths start to be attached to it too. This is partly due to a coincidence of events. For example, at Glastonbury, we have the meeting of ley lines, we have the ancient church on top of the hill, and we have the burial of the Holy Grail and King Arthur. And because of this, these places become a place of pilgrimage.
Glastonbury is an El Dorado for all those on the search for life's deeper meaning. The priestesses of the goddess movement follow ancient traditions which believe in the maternal essence of life and earth.
People come here and search for the Holy Grail, but in my tradition, in the goddess tradition, the Holy Grail is far more intimate. It is really the sacred part in yourself. It's the creation. So it's really finding that sacred part in ourselves that we all search for.
The Holy Grail. Some believe it's an inner state of mind, but most think it's a real cup. A cup that has forged legends. But if King Arthur's tomb is just fictional, is it possible that the king and his quest for the Grail were never real either? Is the English lead misleading us after all? Many find this hard to believe. The search continues, like in Tintagel on the western Atlantic coast, where Arthur was purportedly conceived. Archaeologist Wynne Scott wants to go over to the peninsula. The bridge remains closed if the winds are too strong. What does the wind gauge say?
It's between 2 and 3 at the moment, so fine to go over.
According to the legend, this is where King Arthur's castle is located. It could be true, since the oldest remnants date back to the early Middle Ages.
So we're now crossing the bridge, across to the main part of the castle, where Richard, Earl of Cornwall, would have had his feasts. This was his great feasting hall. The problem is, the cliff was falling down already in the 13th and 14th century. So soon after he built this great hall, it started to fall down the cliff. So the outer building in front of us here is the first one he built. Part of it fell down the cliff, and then he built a smaller building, and that started to fall down the cliff. And then he built a smaller building, and that survived.
The hall falls into the sea repeatedly. Every time it has to be rebuilt. So the medieval people see ruins constantly and believe they are looking at the ruins of Arthur's castle. But on the island, there really are clues pointing to the ancient royal site.
So once you get outside Richard's castle and you go out onto the island, you'll find lots of buildings that have been excavated in the 1930s. But that's just some of them. We now know there's roughly 100 buildings across the island. It's in fact bigger than London was at the time. We don't have a site as big as this for the post-Roman period. 3 of those houses were excavated in 2017, and we found large amounts of pottery there. And a lot of this pottery is from the Mediterranean, from Greece, from Tunisia, North Africa, and also glassware from Spain and France. What it's indicating is that this site was very prestigious. It was a very high status site and really important. We think it's probably a royal site.
Tintagel was once ruled by a powerful man, possibly a king. Perhaps it was Arthur after all.
Well, the first reference of Tintagel in the legend of King Arthur is when Geoffrey of Monmouth, in the 12th century, said that Arthur had been conceived here. This may be entire fiction made up in the later medieval period, in the 12th century or round about then, because they knew of this as being an important ancient site. They must have been able to see the ruins right across the island. But maybe there was real folklore that associated King Arthur with this site. So it is possible, if King Arthur was a real person and lived in the post-Roman period, it's quite possible, since this is such an important, perhaps royal site, that King Arthur was very closely associated with this. So the legend might well be true.
King Arthur might have been a Roman commander or the chief of a Celtic Germanic tribe. But there is no hard evidence confirming his existence or that of the Grail. Have people been looking for the wrong thing? What if the Grail is not a chalice, but something completely different? Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper is said to contain explosive information. Visitors marvel at the mural in the church Santa Maria della Grazia in Milan. It depicts Jesus and his disciples on the eve of the crucifixion. Da Vinci lived in Milan at the end of the 15th century. A universal genius who allegedly put encrypted messages in his artwork.
Da Vinci is known for hiding secret messages in his works, and this is because he was much more than an artist. He was a visionary and an inventor and an intellectual. But in doing this, Da Vinci is actually operating a lot like myths. Myths are not supposed to be read literally, they are supposed to be symbolic. So in the same way we have to decipher the meaning behind a myth, we also have to decipher the message that Da Vinci is putting in his paintings.
What secret does Da Vinci's Last Supper hold? While it shows bread and wine, there is no chalice. The Grail should be right in front of Jesus, but it isn't. Instead, Jesus and his disciples all have their own glasses. Author Dan Brown puts forward a spectacular theory in his book, The Da Vinci Code. He states that the painting depicts the Holy Grail, but it isn't a cup. He points to the strikingly female features and the posture of the disciple next to Jesus. Could this be someone else other than John the Apostle? And there's more. Jesus and the person next to him form a V, the symbol of femininity and fertility. Dan Brown concludes that the disciple is in fact a woman, Mary Magdalene. She is said to be close to Jesus. They even have children. Is she the Grail? A scandalous thought for the Church.
If Mary Magdalene's really the mother of Jesus' child, then the Catholic Church shouldn't just be afraid of the authority that that lineage might have in competition with their own. The bigger threat is that it introduces a different path to the heart, to the divine, than is offered by the Catholics. It's a path of romantic love.
Dan Brown's theories are based on pure fiction, but he sold millions of copies. Mary Magdalene's role, however, is also contested by scientists. Is it possible to solve the mystery of the Holy Grail? Many Valencians believe there's no need to, since the Santo Chalice is the Grail. Historian Michael Heseman's findings also support this. He believes he has proven the chalice was kept in the mountain monastery San Juan de la Peña. But Heseman can't provide more than clues. The historian returns to Valencia to meet Gabriel Songel. The professor of design has discovered something that could corroborate the legend of the Grail with new facts. An 11th century list of all the properties of the monastery.
Everybody has already read about it. Sure. What I want to see is what people hasn't seen. That is the design that is inside.
People have known about the list for a long time. At first glance, it doesn't make mention of the Santo Chalice, but Songel has a theory. A secret encryption code could reveal hidden information.
The Bene Valete was one of the signals of the pose. It's a very interesting graphic design based on the big N.
Bene Valete, farewell, is a seal of medieval popes. A capital N forms the basis. The other letters are ornately arranged in the N. How can this key help us find the Grail? Songel places it on the text.
This is a very important background to understand how they build this acrostic. Okay, you will see the big N, especially the letters L-I-S are separated. And what we see here is the C from the letter C on the glossarium. Chalice. Now we build this vertical line towards Jerusalem, and then we find lapis exilis.
These are the exact words Wolfram von Eschenbach uses to describe the Holy Grail in Percival.
So altogether, we're talking about chalice, lapis exilis domini. That means a chalice of precious stone from the Lord.
The medieval poet describes a stone from the heavens, bright like fire.
It's a sensational find. Dating back to the 11th century, this is not only the earliest document mentioning how the chalice of the Lord was taken from Jerusalem to San Juan de la Peña, it also features the term lapis exilis, which Wolfram von Eschenbach used in Percival, originally a chalice made of precious stone. But Wolfram continued his poem, saying that this could also mean a stone from the stars, from the heavens. This is his interpretation, but this document is 150 years older than the Percival romance, and it contains this term.
The raw material used and its age could indicate that the upper part of the Santo Chalice actually comes from Jerusalem. But is it really the cup Jesus held? A chalice made of precious stone? Very few people know as much about the Santo Chalice as Antonio Piro. Decades ago, the goldsmith measured the chalice with his own hands. Since then, he and his sons have been making handmade replicas of the relic. Now, Ana Mafa Garcia wants him to make an exact copy.
Un sentimiento de emoción.
Well, this is very emotional for me. As a choir boy, I spent a lot of time in the cathedral, and we would also sing in the chapel. And that's how it was brought to my attention. My dad got married in this cathedral, and so did I, which is why I have always felt a special affection for the chalice.
Un cariño especial al Santo Cáliz.
The art historian knows exactly what she wants. To her, only the upper part of the Grail is relevant.
So this upper part would be the sacred part of the relic.
This here, this is the Holy Chalice.
Right.
Without this part, I have already inserted this to adjust it.
Fascinating.
The chalice the Lord blessed at the Last Supper is this here.
Making the replicas just like the exact model of the original poses a challenge. There are two main problems: the material and the measurements.
These are the first sketches, the drawings from the time when we first started.
Wow.
Piro wasn't allowed to touch the Santo Chalice when he measured it. He uses simple tools. That's the stencil that allows you to see the shape of the bowl perfectly.
Very interesting. Of course, it's the best way to see if the size is right.
For Anna, it's the volume of the chalice that counts most because it sheds a lot of light on its origins. The material is also key. To comply with Jewish purity laws, the cup has to be made of stone. Wood is too porous, making it hard to clean, and therefore unsuitable as a ritual vessel.
The question of the properties of the Holy Grail are very interesting, especially the fact that if it was a chalice or a cup that were used at the Last Supper, then it would have to be kosher.
Jesus Christ is Jewish. He and his apostles follow Jewish laws and rituals. When Jesus arrives in Jerusalem, he is sentenced to death and invites his disciples for one last meal, the Last Supper. The vessels used for this event are ritual objects and have to meet certain criteria. Ana Mafa Garcia checks the volume of the chalice. Its capacity can tell her whether it was used as a ritual cup.
The chalice of the Holy Grail represents a Jewish supper, a Passover meal. 2,000 years ago, Jews had a family chalice that had to be filled with a minimum amount of wine to allow them to celebrate the rite of Passover, just like they do to this very day. This cup holds 4 fingers, which is half a span, and these are Jewish units, 2.5 revit. That's about this much.
The minimum they have to drink is 1 revit, 86 milliliters. Another revit is for the family. According to Garcia's calculations, the chalice can hold 2.5 revit. So it's possible that the Santo Chalice was really used as a ritual cup. Another part of the puzzle, a valuable ritual cup dating back to antiquity. Whether Jesus held it remains unknown. The longing for the Grail has left its mark on Christian Europe. It's reflected in myths and legends, in poems and songs. Is there at least some truth to all this fiction? In Valencia, people commemorate the festival of the Santo Chalice every year. To many Christians, this stone bowl is nothing less than the cup of the Last Supper. Michael Hesemann and Ana Marfa Garcia are convinced of this too. The Santo Chalice is the real chalice used during the Last Supper.
The Holy Grail is here in Valencia.
The message of the Holy Chalice is universal. It has to be understood by everyone with their hearts.
The yearning for salvation and an ancient myth. From a scientific point of view, there's still no evidence. The search for the Grail will most likely continue. It's the greatest German legend, the saga of the Nibelungs. Heroes, dragons, and a lot of gold.
I think the treasure is still there.
Researchers and adventurers search for the legendary treasure.
The Nibelung treasure can definitely exist.
A huge amount of gold and silver. You couldn't even fathom it in your wildest dreams.
How much truth to the myth is there? What is with Siegfried's wonder sword?
You can see where it got hit.
Scientists are unearthing the origins of the saga. The traces lead them to Scandinavia.
Sigurd's horse Grani, with a legendary cursed treasure on its back.
The search for the Nibelung treasure. The great myths of mankind. Mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend, and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. The Rhine, stream of sagas and myths, and center stage for the tale of the Nibelungs. Allegedly, their legendary treasure was sunk near the German city of Worms. Could it still be there today? Hans-Jörg Jacobi is a Nibelung hobbyist. A former city architect, he has been looking for the Rhine gold since childhood.
You have got to believe that it's true, that what's written in the Nibelung Lied might actually be correct.
He believes in the Nibelungen Lied, the song of the Nibelungs. He used to scour the Rhine with his dad. Today, he's following a lead.
We asked ourselves, how would we pull it off? And surprisingly, there's one approach that seems pretty logical. In my opinion, the treasure is still there.
The legend says the shores of the Rhine were once home to the mysterious Burgundian kingdom. One day, an unknown warrior arrives at the royal court of Worms. It is Siegfried of Xanten, a legendary warrior. He is said to have seized the treasure of King Nibelung in the high north. 40 cartloads of gold and silver, and a cloak of invisibility to top it off. Siegfried kills a dragon with his wonder sword. He bathes in the dragon's blood and becomes invulnerable. But a fallen leaf from a lime tree leaves an unprotected spot between his shoulders. The victorious hero pledges allegiance to King Gunther. As a reward, he can marry Gunther's sister, Kriemhild. They are the protagonists in this epic poem of love, betrayal, and murder. Siegfried and his wife Kriemhild, her brother King Gunther, and Hagen von Tronje, the king's advisor. He sees Siegfried as a threat and puts King Gunther at odds with the hero. In the name of the king, he sets a trap for Siegfried and kills him by thrusting a spear into the only unprotected part of his skin. Hagen gets hold of the treasure and throws it into the Rhine to hide the gold from Kriemhild. The river has kept the secret ever since. The Nibelung treasure has become part of the many tales of the Rhine shrouded in legend. The Hagen monument in Worms is a reminder of the Nibelungs. But if the treasure didn't exist and there was no hope to find it, this tale would have likely been forgotten long ago.
Humans are fascinated by treasures partly because of the monetary value, obviously, but the treasures that we see in myth tend to be more than that. They have a magical value to them. They have a personality of themselves. They're a character in the story. So, for example, if we think in the Nibelung of Siegfried's invisibility cloak, and I think we like the idea of there being something in the world that connects us to a realm beyond our own. So it's a magical power.
The forests along the Rhine are enchanted by the Nibelung's magic to this day. Benjamin Czerny is a passionate treasure hunter. Using a metal detector, he searches for the riches of the past.
I think there are still tons of precious metals buried in the ground all over Germany, just waiting to be found.
It is illegal to unearth treasures in Germany without a permit. As soon as he finds something of value, Benjamin Czerny needs to report it to the local authorities. But that doesn't stop him.
This feeling takes you back to your childhood. You never know what you will find. You could dig up something special on any given day.
Benjamin Czerny has made a great find once before, but he dreams even bigger.
Of course, the treasure of the Nibelungs is one of the biggest myths a treasure hunter can discover. An enormous amount of gold and silver, cartloads. You couldn't even fathom that in your wildest dreams.
He too thinks the treasure lies near the Rhine. There once were early settlers along its shores, and they left behind their goods and chattels.
This is the old Rhine running through the cities of Speyer and Römerberg down to Germersheim and Neupotz. And this forest area over here is quite interesting. There's a creek running through it. I think we might be able to find a few things there.
But without a specific lead, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. St. Gall, Switzerland. There's an important clue here. The Benedictine monastery is home to one of the oldest manuscripts of the Nibelungenlied. It dates back to the second half of the 13th century. Medievalist Joachim Heinzler knows the Nibelung saga better than most. He believes the text is based on true events that took place many centuries before the manuscript was written.
Generally speaking, heroic legends were considered historical, a form of passing on history.
To preserve the ancient knowledge, the Nibelungenlied was recited in rhymes. In Germany, its first lines are legendary. Uns ist in alten Meeren Wunders viel geseit, von Helden, Lorbeeren, von großer Arbeit.
Narrating has an essential function for humans. It is a social act that demonstrates our shared identity. We tell each other stories not only for entertainment, but also to share our values and our history, creating a cultural memory in doing so.
There's truth to heroic legends. Heinrich Schliemann, a 19th century archaeologist, is also convinced. He analyzes locations provided by Greek poet Homer and looks for the ancient city of Troy. Following the leads, he actually manages to find the city ruins, the discovery of a century. Does the Nibelungenlied also contain tangible clues leading to the treasure of the Nibelungs? After Siegfried's death, his widow Kriemhild seeks revenge. She turns away from the Burgundians and marries Etzel, king of the Huns. Kriemhild moves to Etzel's empire by the Danube, where she plans her vendetta against Siegfried's murderers. Upon her invitation, Burgundian King Gunther and his entire entourage travel to the court of the Hun king. They all die in an unparalleled bloodbath. The Burgundians have been eradicated. Pure legend or historically accurate? Truth is, in the Middle Ages, the Nibelungenlied was also popular beyond the German borders. In Scandinavia, where Siegfried allegedly obtained the Nibelung treasure. The saga of the Dragon Slayer has also lived on. Sigmund Earl pores over the story of the Nibelungs on the Swedish island of Gotland. The archaeologist knows details from the Swedish sources like the back of his hand. And it turns out there are astonishing parallels between the Norse tradition and the Nibelungenlied.
The main characters in Scandinavian tradition are the same as in the Nibelungenlied. The German name Siegfried is Sigurd in the north. We also have King Gunther, whose name in Old Norse tradition is Gunnar, and Hagen von Tronje, who appears as Högni.
An 11th century depiction portrays the details of the Norse saga of Sigurd.
This is clearly Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. Old Icelandic sources claim he did not fight against the dragon, but dug a pit and waited inside until the worm heaved its body across it. And that's when he jerked up his sword and stabbed the dragon.
11th century. Is this the earliest record of the myth? There are even older traces in Visby on the island of Gotland. During the Viking years, Gotland was a hub for trading goods, news, and legends. At the Museum Fornsalen, Sigmund Earl studies ancient sources. The famous picture stones of Gotland, some of them dating back more than 1,500 years. They tell of Viking gods and heroes. Could they also hold clues to the Nibelungs? Using photo technology, Sigmund Earl examines a stone dating back to the 5th or 6th century.
Here we can actually see a depiction of a worm-like, a dragon-like monster, and a human figure in front of it.
Is it Sigurd, the Dragon Slayer? The experts create a detailed computer model of the stone. bringing invisible parts to light. The artist may very well have depicted a dragon slayer 1,500 years ago. But he carries an axe.
This doesn't match the legend of Sigurd. In the Old Norse literary tradition, Sigurd does not fight the dragon with a hammer or an axe, but stabs it from below.
It turns out the old stone does not show Sigurd or Siegfried. The search continues in Bunga, Gotland, where other picture stones from the 9th century are kept, some of them in good condition. And the researcher actually finds what he's been looking for, a picture that could tie into the saga of Sigurd.
Sigurd's horse Grani, with the legendary cursed treasure on its back. This is the image that became a metaphor in the language of the Vikings. They called gold Grani's burden. And this is exactly what we see here.
And another detail fits the Norse legend. Sigurd's death, indicated by the figure underneath the horse, a crucial sign for Sigmund Earl.
If this was really the depiction of the fallen hero Sigurd, it would mean that we had the earliest record of the Sigurd and Nibelung saga right here, on the Baltic island of Gotland.
The oldest likely source of the Nibelung saga roughly dates back to the year 800, 400 years before the story was written in Germany. A valuable clue in the search for the true story. It is during this era that the serious repercussions of the migration period are seen. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, the continent is shaped for generations by the migration of entire tribes. During this period of transition, it is also the golden age for the historical inspiration for the Nibelung saga, the Burgundian Empire on the Rhine. The first records of the Germanic Burgundians date back to the 1st century, when they were settling in a region now belonging to Poland. The Burgundians established themselves on the Rhine at the start of the migration. And the heart of their empire is exactly where the Nibelungen saga is set, Worms. And just as in the saga, the real Burgundians are doomed. In around 435, they are defeated by Roman troops. They were forced to flee and resettle. The name Burgundy now lives on in France. King Gunther's character is based on an historical figure, the real Burgundian king Gundahar. But there are more parallels between reality and legend. According to Roman sources, the empire got military support from the Huns. And Attila a real counterpart too, Attila, legendary leader of the Huns. Like Etzel, Attila is said to have been married to a Germanic woman. She could be the historical inspiration for Kriemhild. Her name, Ildiko, would be Hildchen, Little Hild in German.
The Nibelung Lied mixes reality with fiction. There were real groups of people called the Burgundians, and this is a story about the fall of those great groups of people. We also have the Hun, who are mythologized as being incredibly scary. So the fact that it has this central core of reality means that we can actually believe all aspects of the myth, which makes them more powerful.
With so many characters having traceable roots, it makes it even easier to conclude that the legendary treasure must truly exist.
The Nibelung treasure can definitely exist. Between the 3rd and the 6th centuries, People buried things constantly, particularly precious metals, gold, silver, jewelry, dishes, weapons. They've been found repeatedly over the years, hordes of the most majestic treasure. So the idea that the Nibelung treasure's still out there somewhere is very real.
For treasure hunter Hans-Jörg Jacobi, the traceable routes serve as confirmation.
During the migration period, it was common for every group to carry a treasure. They had to pay their people somehow. That's why every tribe had a treasure.
In the Rhine, countless divers have searched for the treasure, to no avail. Hans-Jörg Jacobi is convinced of one thing: they were looking in the wrong place.
The Nibelung lead actually gives the exact location of the sunken treasure.
One line in the Nibelungen lead has caught his attention.
Hagen sank the treasure near Loche.
Is this the location of the treasure? Jacobi studies old maps of the region and comes across a place that has long since disappeared.
Lochheim, Loche.
Not only the name stands up, the location seems perfect too.
A bit further down the Rhine, there's a corner. A large bend in the river, where the water's very deep. Down about 16 or 18 meters at average water level. Today it is called the Dark Place.
The bend is still obvious to this day, but Jacobi has a theory as to why divers couldn't find anything. The course of the river has changed over the centuries. Bends have been straightened, tributaries have dried up. The riverbed has moved many times. What used to be the bottom of the Rhine is dry land today. Might this also affect the spot that Hagen once chose? Benjamin Czerny also searches on land. The forest he's scouring lies right next to a small tributary of the Rhine. Unlike in fields and populated areas, many things remain buried in the ground, untouched.
I'm getting a good signal here. I'm definitely going to dig here. Oh, I've already found something. There it is. There. Look. Man, that's crazy. Look. That's incredible. An old brooch made of silver. That's really cool. It's definitely an Art Nouveau brooch dating back to around 1910. They used to make a lot of things with these flowers back then. That's beautiful. A great find, for sure.
Not from the time of the Nibelungs, but the first sign he's on the right track.
The ground is a bit deeper here, and this deepening stretches out along this line from here to there. I suppose this used to be a path a long time ago. There could be more. Let's continue looking over there.
He follows the former road attentively, and it's not long before he gets the next signal.
Wow. I think that's a coin. It's tarnished and green, but you can see a bit of red along the edges. So it's probably copper. It seems pretty old too. They had copper coins 2,000 years ago. Copper, bronze, and so on. They had that very early on.
Czerny can only determine the exact age of the coin and whether it will lead him to the Nibelung treasure once he's home. while Hans-Jörg Jacobi believes he has already found the right place.
We suppose the Rhine used to run closer to here and moved slowly over time, maybe even by as much as its own width. And that's when we said, we actually have to go down there and see what we find.
Jacobi followed his hunch. In the 1970s, with some heavy machinery, he drills a shaft. But the treasure hunt proves complicated. At 10 meters down, the drill hits hard rock. Jacobi orders to stabilize the shaft with pipes. But the structure isn't safe.
We sent a diver in, who immediately started knocking against the wall. And then we pulled him up again with great effort.
The endeavor is too dangerous, and Jacobi aborts the mission. But the failure still boosts his hopes. He believes the impermeable layer of rock could be a cover Hagen placed over the treasure. He suspects there is a cavity beneath it, filled with the gold of the Nibelungs.
It's possible that there are amphoras standing side by side, and maybe there's some sort of stone cover on top of them.
Jacobi can't secure any funding for other excavations. To this day, he hasn't been able to prove his theory.
I think one day it will be found, but it won't be so easy.
Or was the gold of the Nibelungs already found long ago? One of the most precious finds from the Rhine lies here today on Museum Island in Berlin. The museum is filled with showpieces of centuries past, and Heino Neumeier, museum curator, has a real sensation in store: the horde of Neupots. In 1967, the first of these pieces appear in a gravel pit in the Rhine. A dredger brings them up. Historians feel incredibly lucky. Because they were encased in the sand of the riverbed, large parts have been well preserved over the centuries.
It was a coincidence and luck that the workers paid attention in that moment and realized the importance of their find right away.
Divers closely examine the ground of the gravel quarry. They want to make sure they don't miss a single piece. The treasures unearthed by the dredgers exceed all expectations. Mirrors, weapons, and vessels brimming with ornaments. Silver, bronze, copper, iron. The value of the raw materials alone is quite impressive.
What we have here is really extraordinary, really unique. It's the biggest hoard from Roman times that was ever found north of the Alps.
Together, the objects weigh over 1,500 pounds, a real treasure, just like in the Nibelungenlied. The divers also retrieve military equipment and tools, and the hinges of rotting cartwheels. Another consistency, because the treasure of the Nibelungs is loaded on carts too.
The Nibelungenlied also states that heavy bullock carts moved this treasure out of the city of Worms, so there are a few things that add up.
Many details seem fitting, but there are also some confusing discoveries.
We also discovered skulls, skeleton parts in the Rhine. Although we can never determine for sure whether they belong to the treasure, they could point to a battle.
In Roman times, the Rhine was a demarcation line subject to fierce fighting. The Romans used battleships in an attempt to protect their empire against Germanic attacks. With limited success, Germanic pillagers incessantly attack wealthy Roman settlements and return east with lots of loot.
It's
possible the Roman fleet intercepted the Teutons on their way back. We know that the Romans trapped returning Teutons in the province of Rhaetia, but also in Colonia, and defeated them.
But the Teutons can't outrun the fast boats of the Romans. The treasure of Neupots might have sunk in the Rhine during one of their battles. The Roman coins that were found along with the treasure seem to confirm this.
It
is striking that there are no coins minted after 260 CE. We therefore have to assume they all went into the Rhine before or around the year 260.
This is exactly when the Teutons launched what was then their most major attack. Around the year 259, they crossed large parts of the Limes and advanced deeply into Roman territory.
There are sources that document these pillages. In combination with a series of coins, this leads us to a very concrete event in 259-260.
It is clear, the horde of Neupots can't be the treasure of the Nibelungs.
The Nibelung lead is set around the year 500, while this event took place 250 years earlier.
Is the Nibelung treasure still waiting to be found? Or is it merely a myth? The treasure hunt begins when old manuscripts were rediscovered. The Nibelungenlied got hardly any attention for centuries, but was found again at just the right moment.
The Nibelungenlied had basically fallen into oblivion until 1755. That's when it was rediscovered. That's when the modern history of the Nibelungenlied begins.
Late in the 18th century, medieval legends suddenly become hugely popular. In the same period, Germany is nothing more than a patchwork of kingdoms and principalities. The feeling of a national identity or a common culture is still weak and is shaken by an invasion. Napoleon successfully wages war against Germany's monarchs. In 1806, he invades Berlin. Many German cities fall under French military rule.
The Nibelung saga became very important in the 1800s because Napoleon was rampaging through Europe. He was conquering everywhere he went. And when you have conquerors doing that, what happens is there's a real desire and drive for people to find their own national identity, especially stories which are all about honor, all about strength, and all about resistance. And that's exactly why the Nibelung was so important. In fact, copies of it were given to troops on the battlefront to inspire them against their new foe.
Composer Richard Wagner takes up the story. The opera cycle, Der Ring des Nibelungen, becomes a worldwide success. In 1924, cinema legend Fritz Lang creates the first motion picture of the legendary characters. In his 5-hour-long silent film, he writes cinematographic history, with the Nibelungs rising to the status of national heroes. The Nazis use the tale for their own purposes. It doesn't matter to them that the story actually depicts the downfall of a tribe. Siegfried's valor and the Burgundian loyalty until death are idolized. Nazi propaganda is home to anything that can be presented as typically German.
For the Nazis, the Nibelungenlied represented a real treasure in terms of something they could exploit for their own propaganda. It features concepts like honor, vengeance, battles, blind loyalty. These are themes the Nazis often used for their own purposes and their warmongering.
Siegfried becomes the quintessential German hero. His victory over the dragon fans the flames of the fantasy. A mysterious sword is said to have led him to triumph. But is there truth to this part of the Nibelungen lead? Bladesmith Stefan Roth wants to get to the bottom of this myth. He has mastered the forging technology that was used more than 1,000 years ago.
In the early Middle Ages, bladesmiths were highly specialized workers who basically manufactured every high-tech product of their time, equal to the weapons that are perhaps manufactured in hidden laboratories or at Area 51 today. Back in the early Middle Ages, these smiths did this work.
Back in the 5th century, swords were high-tech weapons, luxury goods and status symbols alike. They are featured in countless legends. Like in the Norse Didrik saga, which has striking parallels to the Nibelungen lead. Wieland forges a powerful sword by rasping an old sword to powder, which he mixes with the feed for his geese. The blacksmith then takes the digested steel. Using his hammer and an anvil, he creates a wonder sword. Does the legend contain a secret medieval formula?
The transmutation of metallurgical recipes into mythic stories was common practice for alchemists of the time. You might have even seen this as more normal than the writing down of a simple recipe.
Stefan Roth wants to fact-check this. He and his son Darius make a sword following the ancient instructions as closely as possible.
We simply mixed the iron ore with dried bird feces.
Bird feces contain a lot of nitrogen, which could make the steel harder. Does this technique really work? Using a special bloomery, the men set out to manufacture the medieval wonder steel so they can get started with the actual forging process. They start by tackling the ball of steel with nothing but a hammer.
We don't just forge the steel to shape it. It's also a purification process. We obviously want to get rid of the slag, the charcoal rests, and of course the ashes.
After many hours of work, they end up with a rectangular block. They go on and fold this basic shape several times, working it again and again with a hammer until they create a long blade. Stefan Roth forges a second sword to compare with the Wieland sword. This weapon does not contain bird feces. Which sword will be better? They will test both blades in an old factory building.
Hi, Stefan.
Hi, Stefan.
Hi. Yes, here they are, our beautiful swords.
Sixt Wetzler from the German Blade Museum wants to put the Wieland to the test.
It's a fascinating experiment to try and find out whether mixing bird feces into the steel really changes its properties. I'm really excited to see what we'll find.
Sixt Wetzler is not only an archaeologist and expert for ancient blade weapons, he is also an excellent swordsman. In our experiment, he will wield the conventional sword, the blade without any bird feces. Stefan Roth brandishes the sword he forged according to Wieland's technique. He too is an experienced swordsman. What's behind the legend of the wonder weapon? The two experts put the swords to the test. Challenge number 1. Sever a rope with a 2-inch diameter. A test that only a particularly sharp blade can withstand.
The sword has to really rip into the hanging rope, making a clean cut. If it is too blunt, it will merely displace the rope.
Sixt goes first with the conventional sword. The test goes off without a hitch. Next up, the legendary sword. The rope stands no chance against Stefan Roth. Interim conclusion after the first round.
I'd say it's a tie.
It's time to up the game. Sixth will now have to cut through a steel pipe. The medieval blade only makes a dent in the modern steel. Will the alleged wonder sword be more powerful? Not at first glance, but the blacksmith detects a visible cut.
The Wayland sword performed better, literally a clear-cut case.
The final hurdle is a real stress test. 175 pounds of massive ice.
I'm really excited now. I don't know what's going to happen with this material, how the ice will react, so yeah, we'll see.
Not only is ice extremely hard, it also poses a risk to the blade, which can become brittle and break due to the cold. The regular sword withstands the test, but not unscathed.
You can see where it got hit. It's pretty bent right there.
The ice block shows that a sword doesn't just have to be sharp, but stable as well. Will the nitrogen from the bird feces prove effective once again? Stefan Roth shows no mercy on the ice. It takes fewer blows to destroy it. The crucial question is, how did his sword withstand exposure to the cold?
The edges are perfectly fine. I'm actually surprised myself how much such a sword can withstand. I mean, it's a really brutal test.
And the winner is...
Congratulations. Stefan won 2 rounds.
The Wieland sword scored slightly better. As wondrous as the mythical formula may sound, it seems to have been based on actual knowledge.
Maybe people found out by accident, and maybe the stories lived on in the legend.
Our test has shown legendary swords are more than just a fantasy.
Swords are really powerful in myth because they tend to be associated with power, and they tend to be associated with a particular hero. So, for example, if we think of Excalibur and King Arthur. Also, these swords were often highly decorated, and people wouldn't have seen anything like this, so it made them feel like this was an important and magical symbol.
Siegfried achieves his greatest feat with a sword. He defeats the dragon, an opponent far superior. In the Middle Ages, dragons are more than just mythical creatures. People actually believe that they exist. They represent the ultimate evil. Churchgoers believe they have been sent by the devil. Stories of dragon slayers like St. George depict the victory of good over evil. The myth is fueled by bones that are inexplicable to our ancestors. It is not until the modern period that researchers start to investigate these bones. At first, they believe they are dealing with elephant femurs or the teeth of prehistoric giants. In 1824, British geologist William Buckland is the first to attribute a jawbone to an entirely new species of animal. He says his find is part of a gigantic reptile that he calls Megalosaurus. Dinosaur research is born.
Can you imagine finding dinosaur bones? This happened all over the world in ancient times, and they didn't know about dinosaurs or evolution. So it was easy for them to project the dragons on those, which they did.
The dragon, the sword, Siegfried's feet. If we can find explanations for some of the most fantastic details of the myth, the gold has to exist for certain. He also firmly believes the Nibelung treasure is somewhere out there. Helmut Siegert from Heidelberg. The former engineer is a real expert when it comes to finding treasures.
I've known of the Nibelung saga since I was a child. I still have the book here. It has always fascinated me.
Siegert has developed his own method to hunt for treasures. He has detected hundreds of water sources with a dowsing rod he has built himself. Now he believes to have located the Nibelung treasure too. He is using a thin wire rod meant to pick up electromagnetic vibrations.
I sat down and said, okay, worms. Where can I find anything? And the rod was here, and nothing happened. That's when I said, okay, taking the adjacent map, and you can already see what is happening. The rod is moving to the left. So I drew this line here and turned the map. And then the rod slowly moves further over here.
There really is even a sign on the map marking a location, very close to the Rhine. Will it lead Siegert to the treasure of the Nibelungs? His discovery exceeds all of his hopes.
I'm standing in front of ruins of an old fortress. This used to be a Roman burgus with a harbor where they loaded stones from the Odenwald mountain range onto ships.
An ideal hiding spot for the Nibelung treasure. Taking a small tributary, a ship can quickly cover the distance between the Rhine and the castle, even if it's heavily loaded. The fortress lies protected deep in the woods. According to Siegert's theory, Hagen loaded the treasure onto 2 boats which then traveled to the former Roman harbor basin, where they were sunk along with the treasure. To retrieve it, he would have only needed to drain the basin. To check his theory, Siegert is using a ground-penetrating radar which detects metal in the ground. The device picks up on vibrations exactly where he suspects the treasure to be. Something seems to be buried 4 meters beneath the surface. Siegert is sure it's one of 2 gold-laden boats. For him, this is proof that Hagen sunk the Nibelung treasure in this very location.
It was the most logical thing to do. You could conduct a clandestine operation in the dead of night here, bringing 2 ships here and sinking them to the ground. You could block the branch of the Rhine. You still could access the treasure, which was also mentioned in the Nibelungenlied, since they wanted to retrieve it. Everything fits perfectly. This is where the Nibelung treasure lies.
But Siegert can't confirm his theory. The site is listed as a cultural heritage. Excavations are prohibited. At least he has had a notary attest to a finder's fee, just in case. In 2014, another find near the Rhine makes headlines. In a forest area in Rulsheim, located in the same region, a detectorist finds gold and silver jewelry worth more than €1 million. Is this the Nibelung treasure? In the Rulsheim forest, Benjamin Czerny takes us to the place where he made the find of his life back in 2014.
And this is where we found it. You can still see a little depression.
Benjamin Czerny has nearly made his way back home when his detector goes off. He and his companions immediately take out their spades.
We started digging. First we found some rods, 50 centimeters deep, silver rods that looked like they were from a garden fence.
They unearth more and more pieces, one by one.
Of course, we felt a certain adrenaline rush as we found all the individual parts and saw how they shimmered, all silver and golden. It's the best outcome for any treasure hunter.
He films the entire horde at his home and proudly presents his discovery online.
The most beautiful piece. Unfortunately, the gems are missing. They probably fell out.
The video attracts the attention of the authorities, who then seize the treasure. The barbarian treasure of Rulzheim ends up in the State Museum of Koblenz. What the treasure hunter thought to be a garden fence is a rare Roman folding chair. But the real sensation is the bowl.
These bowls are absolutely typical of treasures linked to the Huns.
It's the archaeological proof that the Huns were near the Rhine, at the same time as the Burgundians. Is the barbarian treasure of Rulzheim the legendary Nibelung treasure? Scientists still haven't been able to answer this. The problem? A layman has excavated the pieces. A lot of important information was lost in the process.
To archaeologists, an excavation site like this is just like a crime scene. As an archaeologist, you can find countless pieces of information there, in the way the objects are lying next to each other or the scientific samples you can take. And of course, this changes entirely once someone goes digging about with a spade or a hoe. That's just as bad as being a detective who arrives at the crime scene and the cleaner has already tidied up.
While the pieces are clearly from the Burgundian era, it remains uncertain whether they are part of their treasures.
It's possible that this treasure is one of many that went into the ground during the migration period and one that laid the groundwork for future legends.
So maybe the Nibelung treasure is already in a museum, without being labeled as such. Or the hoard is still deep in the ground somewhere in Germany, just waiting to be found by detectorists like Benjamin Czerny.
I think you only come across a treasure as huge as the Nibelung treasure by coincidence. It takes a lot of luck, just like winning the lottery.
And so he hopes that one day he will make another sensational find. Treasure hunter Hans-Jörg Jacobi has found bliss in the actual song of the Nibelungs. He has even composed his own melody.
Uns ist in alten Meeren wunders viel geseit, von Helden, Lobebären, von großer Arbeit, von Freud und Hochgezieten, von Weinen und von Klagen, von kühner Reckenstrieten, moget ihr nun Wunders Ohren sagen.
The Rhine seems to be the only one that knows for sure whether the Nibelung treasure has ever existed. The only certainty we have is that the old myth is much more than mere fantasy. It is the dramatic echo of history. The Huns, a symbol of fear and terror, and their king Attila.
Many legends and sagas feature the funeral of Attila.
To this day, his death is shrouded in mystery.
They try to hide the tomb.
Hungarian scientists are searching for the legendary tomb. They make fascinating discoveries and are getting closer and closer to the Huns.
I'm standing on the wall of Attila's castle.
Will they uncover the secret of the Hun king?
Unbelievable.
Where's Attila's tomb? The great myths of mankind. Mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend, and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. The Hungarian steppe, home of the Huns in the 5th century. From here, they set out to plunder and conquer. Ghost riders attacking out of nowhere, forcing entire tribes to flee. Their greatest leader, Attila, the king of the Huns. Who is this legendary ruler responsible for instilling fear across Europe? Adam Baumgartner is fascinated by the myths surrounding the Huns. He heads a group south of Budapest that examines ancient combat techniques. Equipped with horses, armor, and weapons, they dive deep into the history of the Huns.
The most fascinating thing about the Huns is that they came from nowhere. They fought with both Roman empires, defeating one of them. And they also wanted to recreate this beautiful period of history, to recreate the Hunnic lifestyle.
To the group, there's more to it than just the folklore. Armor, clothes, weapons, and combat techniques. They want everything to be as true to detail as possible. Attila has become a cult legend to many Hungarians. Nobody knows exactly what the Hun king looked like. His people didn't leave behind written documents. Only his enemies write about him. And so Attila is remembered mainly as one thing: the Scourge of God, the incarnation of the devil spreading doom and disaster across the world.
Psychological warfare works on the basis that we are hugely intelligent cognitive beings with very, very strong imaginations, which means that imagination and our emotions can be manipulated. It works because it takes some of our attention away from the battlefield. It was in the Huns' favour to be feared because it meant that some of the battle had already been won even before the actual battle commenced.
In the West, in the 4th century CE, the Huns appear on the world stage for the first time. As part of bloody campaigns, martial horsemen advance deep into the heart of Europe. Their greatest enemies are the Romans, still ruling over half the continent. But the empire struggles to fend off the quick advances of these new opponents. The Huns overrun and raid vast stretches of land. In the 4th century, the Roman Empire is divided into two separate empires, one in the west and one in the east. After subjecting a large number of Goths to their rule, the Huns move on to Roman legions.
We don't know exactly why the Huns started to move. Perhaps it was climate change, perhaps they were searching for new fertile land for their growing numbers of horsemen. But we are certain that when they started to move, they pushed in front of them tens of thousands of people, and they fought those tribes as well, pushing them up against the walls of the Roman Empire.
Scientists still debate the origins of the Huns to this day. The only thing they agree on is that they came from the huge Asian steppe, nomads living off husbandry and hunting. Their departure to the west is closely tied to one name: Attila, born around 400 CE. In the 5th century, he and his allies took regions by storm. To this very day, Hungarians celebrate him as their national hero.
Myths tend to get exaggerated over time because they come from an oral tradition, which means that each retelling is different. Further, many of them were performed, so to hold the audience's attention, it's important to make them as entertaining as possible. The heroic become more heroic, the magic becomes more magical, and the power becomes more powerful.
His death is shrouded in legends, helping to solidify his mythical image. To this day, nobody knows how and where he was buried. His dead body is said to be protected by 3 layers of iron, silver, and gold. Allegedly, Attila's followers cut off their hair and wounded their faces to mourn his death, with blood in place of tears. Legend has it that the men who dug the pit were then killed to ensure the tomb would forever remain undiscovered.
The practical answer for why the undertaking slaves were killed is that they didn't want anybody to find the treasure or find the tomb. But the more religious reason might be that he wanted to take these people with him. This was a common motif. This happened all over the world, where fallen kings would want to leave with their servants.
Most experts believe Attila was buried in Hungary, in an undisclosed location near the Danube. The search for the legendary location inspires researchers and hobby treasure hunters alike. Time and time again, someone claims to have found him, but they are never right. Musician Leventi Seregni has been looking for traces of Attila and the Huns for quite some time. He's on his way to an excavation site in the Pilish Mountains.
No, we are going to hell.
His search for the Hun treasures is financed with private means. He has had a decade-long fascination with Attila and a brilliant career as a rock star. In Hungary, since the 1960s, Leventi Seregni has been as famous as John Lennon.
Fejükre is állhatnának, érdekelni nem tudnának ők. Bár tudnám hova, de hova, de hova.
Today, he's visiting the place where he believes he'll find traces of the Huns, the Moonshine Quarry. Here, Leventi Seregni and his excavation team have unearthed several treasures from the Hun era. Any new discovery could bring him one step closer to Attila. Leventi Seregni thinks the Huns used the area as a burial site, and he's hoping to find clues leading to the legendary Hun king.
This used to be a Roman quarry. When the Huns arrived, they changed everything, but nobody knows why.
Recently, the team has found some bones dating back 1,500 years. A first clue as to how the Huns might have used this former quarry.
Researchers have found a complete skeleton beneath this rock. It belonged to a cow. They discovered more bones deeper down, a human skeleton. This is a typical pagan burial ritual.
The place seems to be a sacred site to the Huns. Could Attila's tomb be close? Leventi Seregni and his team will continue their search in a few months. If Attila's tomb was to be found, it will probably be here in the Hungarian plain. But without any written clues, it's nearly impossible to pinpoint exactly where it could be.
Studying the Huns is very difficult indeed because they were a nomadic people, and the only way you can find out about them is to see what other peoples wrote about them when they came into contact. Other peoples, like the Romans, who described the Huns in some detail.
Eastern Roman historian Priscus of Panium describes a visit with Attila.
Based on that, we know how Attila and the court looks like and how the traditions of the Huns look. So Priscus said that Attila is a very noble man and he's very simple compared to the other Hunnic lords.
Priscus presents Attila in a soft light. He showed himself temperate. His cup was made of wood, while to the guests were given goblets of gold and silver. But Attila has more than one face. He kills his brother Bleda to come into power. Both rule as kings, but Attila is only second in line. He wants to be the sole ruler and bring his brother's devotees into his own army. It remains unclear whether the fratricide really took place as recorded, or if Attila's enemies were merely attempting to slander him. But we know Attila wins the loyalty of the most important tribal chiefs. Germanic tribes also fight alongside him. Contemporaries estimate his army consists of 500,000 warriors, which is probably exaggerated. Jointly, they wage war against the Romans. Attila starts by fighting the Eastern Roman Empire. Emperor Theodosius pays dearly for peace and agrees to tribute payments. Attila goes on to turn against the Western Roman Empire. The empire of the Hun king stretches from the Caspian Sea to the Alps.
Despite what some historians would like us believe, Attila wasn't just some ruthless barbarian. He must have also possessed some fairly exceptional skills to have been able to organize a cavalry this large. He must have spoken several languages, since the Huns were people of various ethnicities. So he was knowledgeable, he was strategic, and he knew how to negotiate with other rulers.
Remains of the Huns are scattered all over Hungary. Archaeologist Gabor Wilhelm specializes in excavating antique tombs. To him, each grave is just a piece of the puzzle. Archaeological finds are crucial sources when it comes to reconstructing the history of the Huns, their spread and their wars. Starting in Central Asia, a map shows how the Huns ravaged almost all of Europe and Asia. Some finds even point to Attila himself. One particularly spectacular object is here in the Kecskemét Museum. It is a skull of a warrior whose ostentatious tomb was only discovered quite recently. This warrior lived in the first half of the 5th century, just like Attila, and he was buried in a Hun ritual.
This tomb is an important find because there are still many unanswered questions on the Huns. Thanks to written tradition, we know a few things about Attila, but finds from this era are rare. Even the smallest artifacts help us to complete this mosaic, this puzzle.
We got the skull back from the anthropologist. He pointed out that the nasal bridge is very large. This is a crucial detail. It's a typical Mongolian feature. Right after the excavation, he also said that there are traces of the upper bandage up here. We were also able to see this in the first pictures.
A very particular custom of ancient tribes is artificial cranial deformations. To elongate the skull, the Huns wrap their babies' heads in bandages while their bones are still malleable. These deformations were likely most practiced amongst aristocratic families to demonstrate their superior status.
Brilliant.
One of the most deformed skulls he's ever seen.
He must have been really handsome.
But who is this mysterious Hun warrior? The tomb is unusually exquisite. Could this be Attila himself? Bountiful burial objects could mean Attila is close. Golden jewelry, belt buckles, an iron sword. No doubt this has to be the grave of a powerful man. But one detail doesn't add up. This warrior died young. Attila, however, probably lived until he was about 50. Nevertheless, the archaeologists linked the find directly to Attila.
This young man was part of the Hun elite, so it's very likely that he knew Attila.
It is quite possible that the young warrior fought alongside Attila. As the supreme ruler of the Huns, Attila always leads his people into battle. It is not only the Huns' legendary morale that gets the Roman rulers into dire straits. Adam Baumgartner's men train with weapons of antiquity: swords, spears, arrows, and bows. The premier class, fighting on horseback like in Attila's time.
The Huns are training their whole life. They are training with different weapons. They are training to use the spears, use the bows. The bow is the basic weapon, and it is used for break up the formations of the enemies and also strike them from far away.
The Huns are coming!
The Huns are specialized in taking their opponents by surprise. Baumgartner's group is rehearsing an attack on a Roman camp.
Secret of the Hunnic warfare is that they are fighting from a running horse and they are using a very powerful bow.
The Huns retreat after every attack, only to strike again unexpectedly at a later date.
Everybody's afraid of what they don't understand, especially when it can sneak up fast and kill you at a distance. The Huns were very foreign and somewhat unknown. And not only that, they had practices of ripping their faces open when somebody died in battle as though they felt no pain. And when they rushed into war, they showed no fear. When you're thinking about having to face that kind of force, it might be really scary to think that you might not have that inside of you that you need to match it.
The Huns use a new technique to wage war. Their secret weapon is the Hun bow, which at the time was unheard of in Europe. The ancient high-tech bow is made from various materials: wood, horn, sinew, and bone, glued together in multiple layers.
Here on the inside of the bow you have the animal horn, the center has a wooden core, and on the outside there are animal sinews. Here we can see that the horn and the grip have been reinforced with bone plates.
All these features reinforce the bow while making it highly flexible. The bow is drawn further back, and its various components are able to store more energy. The composite bow used by the Huns also has a special shape.
The Huns used asymmetrical composite bows equipped with rigid horns. We can see that the lower limb is a bit shorter than the upper limb, making it much easier to move on horseback.
This type of composite bow helps Attila win. The deadly arrows are accelerated by the horse's speed, which further increases the force of their impact. The nimble composite bows allow the Hun to shoot backwards, even when galloping in the opposite direction, meaning they can weaken their enemies even in retreat mode. We want to put the impact of these ancient arrows to the test. Our target, 2 pumpkins. Our weapons, a longbow, the typical long-range weapon used in Roman times and into the Middle Ages. Next to it, the composite bow of the Huns. Bows can only be drawn right before they're shot, otherwise the force exerted at rest would be too great. Which type of weapon is more destructive? The bows are shot from the same distance, using the same type of arrow. The longbows up first.
The longbow went through.
Next up, the composite bow. It stores almost twice as much energy when drawn.
Whoa, you smashed it! Oh yeah, it's complete.
The result is clear. The arrow from the Hun bow penetrates the pumpkin almost completely.
Composite bow is the winner.
The composite bow makes the Huns the superpower of late antiquity, and their merciless warfare becomes part of collective memory. The rumors about the brutal horsemen were quite demoralizing. Their goal is to force the enemy to surrender and have frightened soldiers join their ranks, a myth that survives the centuries. The expression, "the Huns are coming," remains a symbol for calamity up until the 20th century. In 1900, German soldiers are deployed to China to thwart a rebellion. Emperor Wilhelm II gives his infamous Hun speech, asking his soldiers to show no mercy to their opponents. He wants the Chinese to fear the Germans like the world once feared Attila the Hun. Based on Wilhelm's address, the Hun becomes a new epithet for the Germans. British and American newspapers happily use this image during World War I. In World War II, Nazi propaganda tries to instrumentalize the old fear of enemy attacks from the east, comparing the Soviet army to the Huns. In December 1941, Hitler declares the Soviet Union is trying to destroy Europe as the Huns once did, and therefore to save Europe, he must invade Russia.
The Huns became a very valuable tool for later propaganda purposes, because if you needed to label a people as unpredictable, as violent, as ferocious, then you simply called them the Huns, and to do so brought with it this air of mystery, of wildness, and of violence.
The Huns, fearless and merciless warriors, an image that lives on for over 1,500 years. In another experiment, we are trying to find out from which range the weapons are effective. In battles, penetrating power isn't the only deciding factor. Reach also plays a key role. On a field near the riding arena, the men mark out 200 meters by placing a pumpkin on the ground every 20 meters. The Roman longbow is once again going head-to-head with a composite bow. At 32 meters per second, the Roman arrow covers 100 meters. What force will the composite bow unleash? The Hun arrow reaches a speed of 42 meters per second and hits the ground at 170 meters. A difference of 70 meters, a clear advantage in attacks on the Romans. With their superior long-range weapon, the Huns under Attila weaken the Roman empires in the east and the west. They advance by the thousands and break their adversaries' line of defense with a deadly rain of arrows. The Roman army is helpless. The Hun arrows decide battle after battle. The Huns are legendary because of this novel military technique. Soon, every child in Europe knows Attila's name. But his death still remains a mystery to this day. Nobody knows where he was buried. Some believe Attila's tomb has to be in the riverbed of the Danube or the Tisa, one of its tributaries. The exact location, unknown. Descriptions only tell us how the burial reportedly took place. The details bear great resemblance to the funeral of Visigoth King Alaric, who ruled only a few decades before Attila. Allegedly, he is buried in a drained riverbed as well. Attila's final resting place is also meant to remain a secret forever. He is said to have been buried per request under a river in a secret ceremony. So, can we find Attila's tomb in one of the Hungarian rivers? Attila Todt is an underwater archaeologist. The Hungarian rivers are like a second home to him and his team. If Attila's grave really were to be found on the bottom of the Danube or one of its tributaries, Attila Todt would be the one to find it. From his boat, the scientist scours the riverbed for hidden objects using a side-scan sonar.
There are big trees on the water. It's a bit dangerous today not to hit a tree trunk.
Can he find Attila's tomb?
Actually, we don't know where is Attila's tomb. It is possible that under the Danube, because of course he was a very important person. His center of his empire was in the present-day Hungary somewhere. So probably they tried to hide the tomb, so it could be actually true.
Riverbeds are wonderful locations for preserving historic material. There is no air, and that means that the material can be preserved for centuries. So there's every chance that if we found the right place, then Attila's burial chamber would be preserved just perfectly.
But how could a king be buried under a river? The Danube or Tisa would have had to be dammed or drained. The Hun warriors on horseback could only have achieved this by using topographical features, with islands to shorten the dam. A natural barrier would mean the water only needs to be dammed on one side, while the other side serves as a natural drain. This way, Attila's men might be able to dig a grave that could be inundated at a later date.
We found Roman materials and far older relics along the Danube. I don't see why we wouldn't be able to find memories of the Huns, if not Attila's grave itself.
Will the underwater archaeologist track down Attila's hidden tomb?
The Danube is full of cultural remains starting from prehistory up to modern period, because this was the highway of Europe.
It's highly likely that it was crossed by a Hun army 1,500 years ago.
On the screen, we can see what is under the water. It's like a map, a flat map of the Danube, right and left of the boat, and we see everything which is just a little bit emerging from the riverbed.
Ultrasonic waves and GPS data from the boat provide researchers with images of what lies beneath the riverbed. Whatever is hidden down there, a tomb, ruins, lost treasures, will be visible on the screen. Suddenly, they discover something.
We have a very big block, maybe a piece of wall. We are just going over two walls, forming rectangular structure. Maybe, it's beautiful. I think it was a Roman tower, a big tower of fortification.
an old Roman fort on the outer imperial frontier.
So this is the position where we have to dive, and I think it's a very good location because we have no current. The depth is only 4.7 meters. Yeah, we save the position, so we dive here and look at what's under the water.
The site is promising. This is exactly where the river divided the Roman Empire from the great empire of the Huns 2,000 years ago, the Danubian Limes. The Romans built a series of forts along the stream because of the repeated clashes between Huns and Romans. Attila's looking to raid and force them into making tribute payments, a business model that submits opponents. To the Romans, it's the beginning of a long and trying war. Neither protective walls nor military equipment can shelter them from the Hun attacks. The chain mail is a typical piece of Roman armor. Used for centuries, it protects them against cut and thrust weapons. But can it also deflect Hun arrows? This group wants to put it to the test. From a 10-meter distance, the penetrating power of an arrow is deadly. The chain mail does not stop the projectile. The Huns use another kind of protection, lamella or scale armor, which can even withstand arrows. Hun leaders and tribal chiefs went into battle wearing this armor, and Attila most probably did too.
The armor is created from thin plates of lamellas made from iron. It's very light, very movable. You could raise your hand, you could use the bows. This is a very protective layer.
A test will show if the lamella armor can really protect against projectiles. Can the thin iron lamellas deflect an arrow? The arrow really bounces off. The energy spreads across the lamellas, weakening the impact. It's clear the Hun armor provides better protection, at least against incoming arrows. It's also light and flexible, ideal for fighting high on horseback.
It went through the chains and the lamella blocked it.
Their weapons, armor, and combat techniques fuel the myth of the invincible Hun. The Hun combat technique is superior, thanks to their bowmen and horses. Together, the rider and his horse form a perfect fighting machine, nimble and fast. Contemporaries scoff at them, claiming the Huns lived their entire lives on horseback, purportedly even sleeping in the saddle and negotiating on horseback.
The Huns are training from early childhood on horseback. The speed of the horse is also giving them additional range and power.
Their horses allow the Huns to cover up to 80 kilometers per day, which makes them more than twice as fast as the Roman legions. The horseback attacks are also psychologically powerful.
They are using the blood of their enemies to warming up the horses. They put it to the nose, so they are not afraid from the smell of the blood.
Ghost riders attacking their adversaries out of the blue, lightly armed but incredibly fast and nimble. They instill fear into the hearts of Europeans. And one man embodies this terror like no other. Attila, almost superhuman, invincible. At the peak of his power in 451, Attila attacks Roman cities in Gaul, culminating in a decisive battle of the Catalonian plains. 40,000 Roman warriors against 45,000 Huns and their devotees. In ancient times, it's the battle of the nations. The Roman troops managed to push back and surround Attila. It's a stalemate. For the very first time, the dreaded Hun king is forced to admit defeat. Attila loses his reputation for being invincible. The following year, he invades Italy, but can't conquer Rome. In 453, Germanic Princess Ildiko arrives at Attila's court. He marries her, and the Huns celebrate all night. But in the morning, there is silence, the legend goes. An attendant finds Attila dead in his bed next to his wife. He is said to have choked on his own blood, maybe in a drunken stupor. Or did Ildiko kill him?
So, was he poisoned? Did he die in his sleep? There certainly would have been motivations to tell a different story if he did die in his sleep. One, warrior cultures tend to prioritize warrior deaths. So to die of a murder would have been much better than to die in your sleep. And at the same time, people want to blame somebody when something bad happens. And so you can imagine that when you walk in and you find your king dead and a woman cowering there, it would have been easy to have blamed her whether she did it or not.
Attila's death is just as mysterious as the circumstances of his funeral, shrouded in ancient myths. The version of the story in which Attila is buried in a river makes it into the Hungarian history books. But the tomb still hasn't been found to this very day. Does it lie on the bottom of the Danube or Tisa? And why is the uncertainty so tormenting?
When there are knowledge gaps that need to be filled, when we haven't been able to find out what happened to the mortal remains of a famous person like Attila, there's always room for speculation. There's no tomb we can examine, no skeletons we can look at, so there's a lot of room for imagination.
Attila Todt and his team have found the remains of a Roman fort in the Danube using a sonar device. They need special equipment for the dive.
This metal detector is a very useful device for us because the visibility is very short. I mean, 20-40 centimeters in the Danube. So when we are swimming, we are just scanning the riverbed, and it is signing every small metal object, so you can touch it and look at it if it is archaeological find or not.
Attila Todt's group is one of the most experienced teams in Hungary. They have found many remains from the Huns and Romans. Discovering Attila's tomb would fulfill their lifelong dream.
Of course, everything could be possible. So we are searching the Danube for, and the Tisa and all rivers here in the Carpathian Basin for cultural heritage.
The divers have reached the site of the former Roman fortifications. They go down to where there was once dry land. Patience and the right tools are the only way to find something in the mud. The diver passes the Roman walls, once providing protection against the Huns, diving through the murky water of the Danube. Suddenly, the metal detector starts going off. There's got to be an iron object hidden between the stones. Will the diver manage to retrieve it? A piece of iron emerges from the Danube.
Looks like a handmade ancient iron nail.
A Roman nail, not a rare sight for the archaeologists. They don't discover any Hun remains this time.
If in a day I will find an iron coffin inside a silver and gold coffin, of course, naturally, I will not throw it back to the water, but we will excavate it and investigate. Of course, everything could be possible.
Until then, the Danube shall keep the secret for herself. A great hero needs a death shrouded by myths.
To the Hungarians, Attila is like a national myth. He's become a central figure in Hungarian historiography because of his power and the way he was able to intimidate his opponents.
Maybe those wanting to find Attila's tomb have to look elsewhere. Budapest, once the heart of Europe. The once royal city of Hungary back in medieval times is now a major tourist attraction. It is also where the life work of an unknown author is stored. The Hungarians refer to him as anonymous. His oeuvre is titled the Gesta Hungarorum, the deeds of the Hungarians. The 800-year-old manuscript is kept in the National Library in Buda Castle. Historian Laszlo Veszprémy has studied it for years. It is the first depiction of Hungarian history that goes back to Attila's time. Narrations and legends that had previously been passed on orally. In Hungary, it's a valuable treasure documenting their past. And it turns out the old text really contains hidden clues about Attila's tomb.
This is one of the most valuable manuscripts of the National Library, written by Anonymous, a nameless Hungarian chronicler, and entitled The Deeds of the Hungarians. It was written around the year 1200 and has been preserved in a 13th century manuscript.
The text tells of Arpad, who ruled 450 years after Attila. Is Arpad the key to Attila's tomb? To Hungarians, he's the second hero besides Attila. He frees his people from foreign rule and secures the region around the Danube. Before he died in 907, he made a special request.
When the great prince Arpad died, which was in 907 according to chronicles, it was documented that he wanted to be buried in the city of King Attila, in Civitatem Attilae Regis.
But where is this ancient royal city of Attila? Some think it could be the old Buda, west of Budapest. On medieval maps, the place is called Sicambria, capital of the Hungarians. Was this the city of the kings Arpad and Attila? Sicambria is believed to be lost, but its ruins might be found in the woods of the Pilish Mountains. Just a few kilometers outside Budapest, near the town of Budakalash, everything comes together. Ecologist Imre Lansky has studied the medieval maps and is convinced that the ancient royal city is located in this forest.
I can't put it in any other way. This is the atrium of the castle, and I'll show you where the walls stood. There we can also see the moat.
Imre Lansky is sure that he's standing amidst the ruins of the palace of Hun King Attila.
This rock and this rock.
I'm standing on the wall of Attila's castle. The wall was already here back then.
If Imre Lansky's assumption proves to be true, Attila's tomb might also be somewhere among these trees and rocks.
This was Sicambria. Later it was called Attila's castle. Etzelburg in German.
Attila's life is a source of myths and legends. The once powerful Hun king also inspired European poets. Under the name of King Etzel, he was also featured in the medieval German saga Nibelungenlied. Joachim Heinzler takes a closer look at this myth in the monastery library of St. Gall. He is a Nibelung expert. He thinks the investigation needs to be conducted using the old text.
In Germanic poetry, this Etzel is indeed the name used in literature to refer to Attila the Hun. You can tell by the name. Language historians were able to trace the name Etzel directly back to Attila.
In the Nibelungenlied, Etzel marries Burgundian princess Kriemhild. Etzel is not portrayed as a brutal ruler, but as an old and mild-mannered king. His royal city is called Etzelburg and lies where old Buda used to be.
This old Buddha, O Buddha, was called Etzelburg in the Middle Ages. We know this as there are records confirming it. And in the Nibelungenlied, the Etzelburg is also referred to as Etzel's residence.
Imre Lansky believes Attila's grave lies in an old quarry directly behind the ruins of the reputed royal city. An excerpt from the Gesta Hungarorum serves as his guiding light.
This book describes that Arpad was buried over the source of a small creek running through the rock. This is why we've come here. I followed the directions in the Gesta Hungarorum. And it is also written that he was buried in a mine. If it hasn't been pillaged, Arpad and Attila have to be there.
The ecologist has observed irregularities in the treetops. Some of the trees have grown in a peculiar way, which could point to a cavity in the ground.
After 8 or 10 meters, the tree or its main branch begins tilting to the side and cannot continue growing straight, so it grows sideways. You can see that perfectly over there. And over there, on the black locust, we can also see the deformation along the whole tree. There's got to be a large cavity underneath us, between here and there.
Infrared imaging also points to a cavity. The cross-section of the area reveals a source of heat. This means there's an air pocket. Lansky has the ground drilled and uses an endoscopic camera. He wants to see if specialists can confirm his suspicion. Are there man-made cavities beneath the rocks?
At about 12 meters down, there's got to be a crack and the edge of a cavity.
The camera probe slowly makes its way through the ground.
How many meters down are we? 10 meters. There you go. Here we are. Slowly, slowly. This is too straight. This stone has been worked. This is a fragmented stone. It is pretty smooth over here too. Go back a bit. And the rock is not the same. This shows that we're looking in the right place.
Imre Lansky has found the cavity.
That's fantastic.
Unbelievable.
Very, very good.
Is this the defining piece of the puzzle in the search for Attila's tomb? Imre Lansky has to be patient and raise money to excavate this site.
If we were lucky enough actually to find the place where Attila the Hun was buried, then, and only then, I think, could we say that he would be no longer a myth.
Attila the Hun, feared and admired to this day. It only seems to be a matter of time until the mystery surrounding his tomb will be revealed.